Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 643, and today's date is April 16th, 2015, and the title of this episode is Countries Around the World Are Now Dumping the Petrodollar. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece, they made their first payment. A lot of talking heads are out there saying they're not going to be able to make their next payment. You have to remember they're raiding the pension funds. They're trying to find money anywhere they possibly can. And we understand they've been making a deal with Russia to spur economic growth. And we see the International Monetary Fund. They're saying, there's nothing to worry about. They don't see Greece exiting whatsoever. And I've said this in many, many reports. Whenever you hear a government official, central banker, doesn't matter, say something, always think the opposite. If they tell you we're in a recovery, we know we're in a collapse situation. If they say that Greece is not exiting, guess what? They're going to exit. It seems they try to convince you the other way, and then the opposite happens. We see here in the United States where they're trying to convince us that everything is fine. The initial jobless claims, they jumped 12,000 from a revised 282,000 to 294,000, back above the average for the year. And it seems like they're just manipulating all these numbers so people don't realize what's really going on. We see a lot more companies starting to lay off. SanDisk is going to let go about 5% of its workers. That's about 435 people. In the oil industry, we see there are over 100,000 people who have been laid off. This is not a good situation. And what's very interesting about this is that when they come out with the unemployment numbers, they don't count these people whatsoever. Even in the initial jobless claims, they don't count these people. Because if they did, it would make everything out of whack. And it would skew everything they manipulated. It wouldn't make sense anymore. And we talk about how the college graduates are having problems getting jobs. And all of a sudden, we see that the job prospects for recent college graduates are deteriorating. This is coming out of the corporate media. They're finally admitting there is a problem. But the reason why they have to admit it is because they're getting to a point where all these college students can't pay back their loans. How do they explain it? So they finally have to come out and say, yeah, it's deteriorating a little bit. But when we look at the numbers, and this is coming from the BLS, graduates with bachelor degrees, under their model, unemployment has climbed to 14.9%. Now, of course, we know this number is probably triple this, because they're telling us that unemployment is 5.5%, and we know this is getting close to 30. And if college graduates is at 14.9, we know that this most likely is around 45% or so. Because we know they don't count everyone. And what's happening now is that the student loans, they're due. There's a huge amount of people that cannot pay off their student loans. They can't make the monthly payments. They're living with their parents. They can't find high-paying jobs. And they have to admit it after a while because things don't make sense. So they come up with a story that it's slowly deteriorating. But we know from the past reports, college, about 80% of them cannot find real work. And it's getting worse. I mean, my wife's cousin graduating Binghamton has a part-time job. He doesn't need a college degree to get a part-time job. Can't find that full-time job. Actually, most of the college graduates coming out of school have no skills whatsoever. A degree is really meaningless today unless you have some skills. What can you actually do? But instead, what they have is about $25,000 to $29,000 worth of debt and no real skills. This is what we're seeing. And you have to remember, the youth, this is the next generation. And if they cannot find jobs, they're not going to be spending money in retail. If they're not spending money in retail, retail stores close. If retail stores close, manufacturers don't have to produce. If manufacturers aren't producing, they don't need the raw material. Baltic Dry Index goes down. If they can't save their money, well, they're most likely not going to get married, have kids, and buy a home. Real estate goes down because who do the older generations sell their homes to when they want to leave a home and go to maybe to an adult community or something like that? No one. The youth generation that's coming up is a disaster. It cannot keep the system going. This is a problem. We see the Philly Fed, after crashing from November to January, in October it shot up to 40, and in December it dropped straight down to 7. And we see that it's just bottom bouncing right now on the graph. If you want to see the graph, you can come to X22Report.com or on the YouTube channel. It's on the video. We're seeing that in April, the new orders plunged to 2-year lows. Again, we're seeing manufacturing completely fall apart. Now, Senator Warren is out there, and she has said that the auto loan market looks increasingly like the pre-crisis housing market. Yeah, it does. Actually, the housing and the auto loan market looks like it did back in 2007, 2008. A complete disaster, but this time it's much, much worse. Because we had all those short sales and foreclosures. We have Americans that do not have good credit, don't have the money to put down on a house, and the only people that are purchasing these homes are foreign investor, hedge funds, investment companies using cash. This is why we see mortgage companies closing and laying off people. The American people are tapped out. And what she is saying is that we're going to have a crisis. Yeah, we're going to have a major crisis. Something that none of us have ever seen before in our lifetime. Maybe those people who are still alive in the Depression, it might look very, very similar. We're starting to see bankruptcies. They're starting to soar across corporate America. In retail, healthcare, mining, finance, bankruptcies are suddenly booming after years of nothing. In the first quarter, 26 publicly traded corporations filed for bankruptcy, up from 11 at the same time last year, the most since the financial crisis in 2009. The largest bankruptcy was the casino operator Caesars Entertainment, which has been unprofitable for 5 years. We're starting to see foreclosures increase once again. Foreclosure activity in the United States rose sharply last month on an increase in bank repossessions, according to a report by the firm Realty Track. Foreclosures now are up 20%. Bank repossessions surged 49% in March. What does this tell us? The economy is starting to crumble and fall apart. We're heading into a depression. We never left the recession. We just kept on getting deeper and deeper in the recession. The U.S. government central bankers, all they did was create an illusion around the recession. And now it's starting to shine through, and they can't stop it. Right now, Florida, Maryland, Nevada, Illinois, New Jersey, they have the highest foreclosure rates last month. This is according to Realty Track. We see the very wealthy are saying, hey, we better get as much money as we possibly can. So what they're doing is they're going to exempt themselves from the federal tax rate on estates. So anyone that has $5.43 million or above will not have to pay estate taxes. And this is for the very, very wealthy. How interesting this is. We are in a fascist government. I mean, this is not a democracy. This is not capitalism. This is fascism right now. And the government is completely corrupt. We see that China is no longer the biggest U.S. debtor. Japan is. Japan now officially holds more than U.S. debt than China, which had about $1.224 trillion in U.S. government bonds, compared to China, which has $1.223 trillion in February. In the last year, Japan has boosted its U.S. Treasury's debt by $13.6 billion, while China has decreased holdings by $49.2 billion. And now we see where the Fed kind of maneuvered QE away from them purchasing the bonds to Belgium, to Japan. They just spread it out, and those banks, central banks, have been creating money so they could purchase the bonds. Or the Fed transfers over those funds. So it looks like they stopped QE, but in reality, they have not. All they did was shift everything all around. And we understand that China is basically trying to have their yuan renminbi, and they want it to be a reserve status. And we know that China is in talks with the IMF. China plans to push for yuan to take prominence in loans under the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Silk Road Fund. People familiar with the matter said China may encourage 100 billion AIIB and 40 billion Silk Road Fund to issue loans directly in yuan or set up yuan-denominated funds under the two institutions. The bank will establish an AIIB currency basket with China, set to push for the yuan to take a prominent role and for special currency funds to be established in order to issue yuan-denominated loans through the fund. Beijing will also encourage the AIIB and the Silk Road Fund to set up special currency funds and issue yuan-denominated loans through both institutions. If the US dollar is used, it weakens China's bid for the yuan to be a global currency, so they're going to try not to use the dollar. The efforts are part of a drive to internationalize the Chinese currency and come as the International Monetary Fund prepares to discuss the possible inclusion of the yuan as the fifth reserve currency and as part of the basket that forms the IMF's SDRs. So we can see China is definitely making a huge, huge push. Now, as China continually pushes for the yuan renminbi to become a reserve currency, we see countries are out there basically starting to dump the petrodollar. And how does the petrodollar work? Well, the petrodollar, or the world in which oil export countries would recycle the dollar they receive in exchange for their oil exports by purchasing more USD-denominated assets, boosting the financial strength of the reserve currency, leading even to a higher asset price and even more US dollars-denominated purchases, and so forth in a virtuous loop. And they just keep doing this over and over and over. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, energy exporting countries are set to pull their petrodollars out of the world markets this year. We estimate that the new lower oil price equilibrium will reduce the supply of petrodollars by up to 24 billion per month in the coming years, corresponding to around 860 billion over the next 3 years. Oil producers are now liquidating their petrodollar assets at a frenzied pace. And this is going to accelerate as the United States government central bankers lose control over those oil-rich countries. Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen. Once those people take complete control of these countries, if they're able to, they will sell the oil not using the US dollar. And even more countries then will dump the petrodollar. This is the first time in 20 years that OPEC nations will be sucking liquidity out of the market rather than adding to it through investments. The IMF said that unless they cut spending, resource-rich nations have no choice but to draw on their financial assets when available, as oil prices are well below the fiscal break-even needed by many of the exporting nations. So we can see there are major problems occurring, and Saudi Arabia just put out that they're going to increase the amount of oil, driving the prices down. Now, while all this is happening, we're probably going to see the value of the dollar decrease. We'll see prices go up. And what else will we see? Well, we will see the government getting prepared for the collapse, because they know it's coming. And we can see that as of right now, TSA, they are preparing its employees to carry handguns. And this is coming from the fedbizops.gov site. And when you look at what's going on here, it looks like they want to arm all the TSA agents. DHS is calling for training that includes night fire drills and various rapid fire drills, in addition to more specialized training. We understand from the fedbizops.gov site that DHS is looking to contract with a company to provide 12.6 million rounds of .223 Remington ammunition per year for 5 years, totaling 62.5 million bullets. From the bullets they already ordered, this is a lot of ammo. What are they expecting to happen? They're expecting riots. They're expecting the collapse. They're expecting to fire on the American people. This is what they're expecting. Like I said, DHS is dormant right now. When they get the green light and things go south, you will see a completely different side of DHS. You will see what they've been training for. And we can see that something is going on at this point in time. I mean, think about it. Right now, the New York Fed is moving a lot of operations to Chicago because they're concerned about a natural disaster, some type of cyber attack, a physical attack in New York. The federal government is now buying 62 million rounds of ammunition. NORAD is moving back into Cheyenne Mountain because of an EMP-hardened area where they're protected. That's very interesting. Government authorities have scheduled a whole host of unusual training around the nation. I mean, Jade Helm, Northern Exposure, which is in Michigan, is a major exercise where the military provides defense support to civilian authorities. Why is Walmart closing? And if you really look at this, all the Walmarts that are closing, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas, California, it is in the Jade Helm states. And they're saying it's a plumbing problem in all of these Walmarts. They're going to be shut down for 6 months. That brings us to October. Jade Helm, July to September. I mean, is this a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that they plan these things out completely. Do I know if this is a live drill? I don't. But we can assume, and I hate to assume, but they're putting everything in place. And if everything goes as planned, they could get the green light and this could go live. And this is something we need to worry about. Now, why would they shut down Walmarts like this? Walmarts are very, very big. Basically, they're just big warehouses. This would be a perfect area to hold, patriots, dissidents, to bring them there first, to hold them in an area. There's not many entrances and exits. There's not really any windows in a Walmart if you really think about it. It's a really great holding area. And it just so happens it is in that Jade Helm stretch in the south. So this tells us, from everything we're seeing, something is definitely going on. Meanwhile, while that is going on, we see military weapons being deployed and shipped to Ukraine. We see the authorization for war still pending, and we see the war going on with Yemen. Warships are right outside of Yemen. The United States is orchestrating the entire event there. And more of these countries are fighting back. We see that 60% of the fleet is going to be pushed to the Pacific. We see they're moving military assets in Eastern Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and to the Pacific. Is all of this just a coincidence? I don't think so. This has been planned from the start, and they're slowly building up. Right now we see Venezuela, that they're looking at Russia to basically have them as their arms supplier. They want to buy weapons. And we understand why. Because they see what's going on. They realize the United States is provoking war, and all of these countries are getting prepared. We see in Ukraine, the southeastern people have dropped the Ukrainian currency because it's collapsing. And right now the ruble is now the de facto currency in that area. We see Odessa is saying, you know something? We want to be separate and apart from the Kiev government. So we have Lugansk, Donetsk, Odessa. They're all pulling away from Kiev, Crimea, and the other regions. So all they have left is that small little portion of the West that they had the coup in. It's falling apart, and they realize this, and the bankers didn't get what they paid for, and eventually they don't care, because if they have to fight with Russia, so be it. Because this is their plan in the end. If they can't prop up the system by taking control of Ukraine, getting into Syria, getting into Iran, they will just start war. However it starts, it doesn't matter. Wherever it starts, it doesn't matter. The players are always the same. North Korea, China, Russia, Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, and the other BRIC nations. And it doesn't matter where it starts, because it will always be those players. Now, in Ukraine, we see that there were 2 journalists that were killed, and of course Poroshenko comes out and said this must be a provocation. It could be a hit, a contract hit, and it might be from the southeastern people. And of course, they've been building this up. If you notice, and we go back in a couple months here, we had bombs that they found, bombs on passenger trains, an explosion on a rail line, and this was all blamed on the southeastern people. They had no proof, of course, they never do, but they're building up to some type of false flag event. Even the Russians are saying that they're going to do something very, very soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if this war kicks off come this late spring, early summer. We see that the Ukrainian government is getting rid of many people. I mean, a former Ukrainian MP, an active anti-Maidan activist, has been killed in his flat. We see on January 29th, the former chairman of Kharkov was killed. On February 24th, the former Party of Regions member died of a gunshot. On February 25th, we see a mayor, Sergei Volter, was found hanged, leaving no suicide note. We see February 26th, the deputy chief of police basically was found dead in his garage. On February 26th, a former MP and ex-chairman of the regional state administration was found dead with a gun wound to his neck. On February 28th, a former member of the Party of Regions jumped from his window. On March 14th, a 32-year-old prosecutor fell from a window of a 9th-floor apartment in Odessa. Are these all coincidences, or is the Kiev government cleaning house right now, getting rid of all those people that are a threat to their authority? We see the OSCE is out there, and they have warnings about a humanitarian situation in the southeastern area. There's a blockade right now. Supplies are not coming into this region. Some are trickling in, and they're saying that it is getting worse as time goes on. The people need food and medicine, and they're not getting it. We see Canada and many other nations bringing in troops into Ukraine to, of course, just train the Ukrainians. Well, why are all these nations getting involved? Because they're pushing an agenda, the central banker agenda. We see the Donetsk people saying that, yeah, Kiev is getting ready for a new stage of military operations. Their weapons have been brought back to the disengagement line. They have new hardware, and they're seeing it daily, all of it being brought right back up to the line. We see Ukraine's armed forces are shelling the hospital, the airport. Tanks are trying to roll in. We see that Ukraine's armed forces are shelling their own people. Those people who are not going along with the Kiev government, they're shelling them. They're killing them. We see what's going on here. We're getting rid of all the people. They're getting rid of all the people that are not going along with their agenda. They're getting ready to make a major offensive in the southeastern area. And we can see that the United States are pushing that agenda in Ukraine. They're pushing it in Yemen, in Libya, in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. And we see the United States is working with allies in Japan and South Korea to increase ballistic missile defense on the Korean Peninsula. They denied this last month, and now they're saying, yes, we're actually doing it. We have been in discussions about potential deployment of additional THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery, beyond the one that's in Guam. But this one is going to be on the Korean Peninsula. Basically, they're going to contain China. This is what they're doing. They're getting ready for it. They're getting ready for war. And we can't have war because we know the weapons in the United States right now do not stand up to the weapons that Russia and China have. I mean, right now in the House Armed Service Subcommittee, they've learned that the F-35 fighter gives false positive readings 80% of the time, which means more delays for this fighter. This is the most expensive piece of junk, and this cannot go up against the Russian jets or the Chinese jets. Iran expects delivery of their S-300 missiles by the end of the year. I am pretty much positive that they're going to get that way before that time period. And we see from all of this war and everything that's been going on, the invasion of Iraq and the re-invasion of Iraq, and now the re-invasion of Iraq, right now, the U.S. has left 1 million people dead in that country. The central bankers, they don't care about human life. They care about their central banking system, profits, debt, controlling. If people have to die, so be it, as long as we're in control. And this is what we're seeing. And they continually lie to us all the time. I don't know how many people remember this, but back in December of 2012, Richard Engel and a group of other journalists were held for about 5 days in Syria. And they claimed, and it was all over the papers, that the kidnappers were forces loyal to Assad. That was to get everyone all heated up, that this is why we need to go get Assad. I mean, they've tried so many different tactics, and they just all failed. But we come to find out, and this is coming from the journalists that were held there, they're saying that the kidnappers were actually not Assad forces. They were basically the Free Syrian Army. They were the kidnappers, and the same Free Syrian Army, they're the ones who released them. It was complete propaganda to make you think that Assad kidnapped these journalists. What would be his motive to do so? He has none. Just like back in August of 2013, what was his motive to gas his own people as he invited the UN Security Council chemical weapons inspectors into his country on the same day. The motive is not there. And then we come to find out that it was the Free Syrian Army who had a cave full of sarin gas, which had the missiles that had the sarin gas, and MIT did a little experiment to show, yes, the trajectory of the missile came from the position of the Free Syrian Army. All of this is to bring us to war, to convince you to do something that you normally wouldn't do. And they're continually doing this. We see with the Sony cyber hacking, they blamed it right on North Korea. But what we find out from WikiLeaks, they published a trove of Sony Pictures Entertainment emails and documents that show that the inner workings of the influential multinational corporation has strong ties to Washington. The Sony archives include about 30,000 documents from Sony Pictures and about 173 emails and 2,200 email addresses. And it seems that 100 U.S. government email addresses were in the archive, and they have connections to Sony. Again, North Korea did not cyber attack Sony. This was propaganda once again. We understand from Judicial Watch, they had a report saying that the Islamic State is 8 miles away from the border of Texas. Well, the question is, where is DHS? Where is the NSA? If they're so concerned about the Islamic State and they're only 8 miles away, where are they? They have no information on this? So something doesn't seem right. I mean, they fly into Syria to get the Islamic State. They bomb the heck out of their infrastructure, their people, to get the Islamic State. They're in Iraq, but 8 miles away from the United States, absolutely nothing. So what does this tell us? This tells us it's propaganda. It tells us that they planted them there and they were going to use them later. So right now, the FBI, and you know what happens when the FBI goes down there, they are sending supervisors down there. They called a special meeting at the U.S. consulate in Mexico. And basically, they didn't invite the DHS whatsoever. And right now, they're probably like, oh, they found us out. We had something planned. And now it's all over the place. Because something doesn't seem right when we're in the Middle East battling the Islamic State, which is a proxy army for the United States, UK, Israel, and other nations, and they're right outside of the United States, and there's nothing. This tells you it's complete propaganda. We see there are warnings out there that modern commercial aircraft could be remotely hacked and taken control of, even by someone on the ground, as they are increasingly connected to the internet. And they're trying to convince everyone that these planes can be taken over if somebody has a USB key on the plane and they plug it into the system. I cannot believe that the passenger electronic systems are any way connected to the navigational controls of the plane. Think about that for a second. They're saying if someone had a virus or malware and they were on the plane as a passenger, that could leak into their systems. No, it can't. They're using this to convince you that this is how the next attack is going to happen. We see an Israeli cyber expert warning that the next 9/11 will be carried out by computer hackers infiltrating air traffic controls rather than suicide bombers. So they're already prepping us for the next 9/11, where it's going to be a cyber hack. It's going to control a plane, and these planes will fly into wherever they want them to fly into. And we already know there are Libyan planes that are missing. We also understand that Israel has the same type of plane, MH370, in their hangars. And I wouldn't be surprised, CIA, Mossad, that they're getting ready to push this event forward by using remote controlled airliners to hit different targets. Nobody needs to be on board. They can paint the planes to make it look like it's a commercial flight that took off here in the United States. There will be U.S. and Air Force drills going on at the same time to keep them away from the areas. We can see the same exact scenario occur once again. And we already know that this next event is going to be a multi-type of an event. I don't think they're just going to rely on physical attacks. I think they're going to bring forth the cyber attacks to convince everyone that it is the Islamic State, it is Russia, it is China, because as we can see, the economy, their prop-up of the economy, their statistical numbers, it's all falling apart. And they're getting prepared, they're getting ready. All the different agencies in the United States government, central banking system, are getting ready. This is not a coincidence. We are on track. They are prepared to go forward. Will this happen in the summer? Could. Will it happen in the fall? They could get the green light. And this is why we look at this every single day. This has been building up. And we've been reporting on this over and over to see how all of this fits into place. And we see that it is. Listen, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.